They've asked the jury if they're open to stay until 7 or 8 o'clock tonight. And I wonder if that means he's actually going to finish his work to the extent that it would behoove him to get this done today in the effort to get to a verdict this week.
Yeah, I think that's certainly the hope that the judge has, that the prosecutor will finish his summation tonight so that first thing tomorrow when the jury returns to court, the judge can give the jury their instructions on the law, and then they can start their deliberations. Obviously, if the prosecutor is not finished by 7 or whenever the jury says they can stay until and can keep their attention until, then it'll continue tomorrow. But I think the reason to extend the jury service tonight is to conclude the summations.
What is your thought about what Robert McWhirter said, the quality of the defense? This is a jury that's about to get one of the most high-profile cases ever tried in the United States. Defense wrapped pretty quickly here, and as the prosecution tries to connect the dots on the testimony that we have heard, I wonder your thoughts on how well the former president of the United States was represented here.
Well, I think that they had a challenge in the sense that the state put together a very good case. And also, I think they were trying to satisfy the demands of their client, which may not have entirely overlapped with what would have been the best legal strategy in defending him in the courtroom. I think that the jury, I also agree with the comment that the jury's deliberations are likely not to be that long here. One never knows, right? It's always possible that there will be one or more jurors who need more time to get to a decision. But there's a sense in which one either believes the narrative that Michael Cohen told as corroborated by substantial other evidence in this case, or one does not. And so, in a sense, the jurors could conclude fairly quickly, I think, whether they are able to reach a verdict of guilty or not guilty unanimously. Now, there are 34 counts, and so in a sense, the jurors would need to go individually through each of those counts. And with respect to some of the counts, the evidence directly tying Mr. Trump to the records that are at the heart of this case is stronger than others. So, for example, Mr. Trump's signature appears on some of the checks that are the basis for some of the falsification of records charges here and not others. But that's legally not that significant because the charge here is that Trump was part of a scheme wherein he caused others to falsify records, even if he did not falsify all of them through his own hand. So it's possible some of the jurors might be hung up on the fact that Trump's signature doesn't appear on all of the records, and that could cause them to spend more time going through the charges individually. Yeah. But again, I think this is a case where it's kind of all or nothing.
34 charges in this case. If you can walk with us through the end of this week, Jessica, based on what you're saying, if this goes to the jury tomorrow, the jury works relatively quickly. We could well be talking about a verdict this week. CBS News is reporting that New York corrections officials have in fact met with the Secret Service about the possibility of incarceration. I don't believe that you see that happening to the former president. Most legal analysts we've spoken with who have experience do not see Donald Trump going to jail. But what does that tell you about the Secret Service in this case, knowing that the president, the former president, could be at least locked up for a day? I don't know if it's an overnight, the way this is going to work. How does this play out, and what should people be prepared for?
Well, the law provides for a prison sentence if Mr. Trump is convicted of these crimes. Even if he's convicted of only one of them, the statutory maximum is 4 years imprisonment. The judge is not required to impose a sentence of imprisonment for these crimes. There's no mandatory minimum prison sentence. And again, prison is not a required sentence at all. The judge has lots of other alternatives, including a fine, probation, conditional discharge, where Mr. Trump would just be subject to conditions that he'd have to abide by. And most defendants who are convicted of this crime, who have not had any other criminal record, would not be sentenced to prison. But that said, the judge has enormous discretion in fashioning the appropriate sentence. And so the fact that the Secret Service has been meeting with New York prison officials, to my mind, just shows that they're being thorough and doing their work so that whatever scenario unfolds, they are prepared for it. And it may be that they were having some of these discussions during the trial in anticipation of the possibility that Mr. Trump would be jailed for contempt of court. As you'll recall, there was a gag order that the court found that he had violated, and the statute governing that authorized prison for up to 30 days for violations of the court's gag order. And so that was a scenario in which the Secret Service would have also been appropriately talking to New York prison officials to be prepared for the eventuality that the judge, for violations for findings of contempt of court, might have been put into prison temporarily.